Welcome again to another marine ecology lecture. Great to have you all here. I think we've got a few newcomers, so I just want to say hello. Thanks for joining us. It's so great to have you here with us. Also, just wanted to say thank you to those who have been posting in the Facebook group. It's great to have that discussion platform. Really enjoying seeing the pictures and all the posts and the comments and that kind of thing. Just keep on doing that. Really enjoying it. My name is Christy. I'm going to be leading these lectures. And I'll just have you guys know I'm very excited about today. I really love invertebrates. I love them so much, in fact, that I have cushions that are helping me channel my invertebrate vibes. So I've got one on that side and then I've got one on this side. So looking forward to it. Let's get straight into it today. We will be looking at invertebrates today. So we'll be looking at some ecology in terms of like feeding strategies and that kind of thing that our invertebrates like to take. And then also we'll get into the identification. Now, I'll just warn you, this is quite a big group of animals, so we're definitely going to condense it quite a lot. Of course, I will be posting extra materials and that kind of thing on our classroom platform as well. Okay, so just getting straight into it. So first off, what are invertebrates? So invertebrates are animals that do not have a backbone or a spine. Now, they are definitely the largest group of animals in the animal kingdom. They actually form 95% of all species on Earth, okay? And that's including our terrestrial examples. So think of all your things like insects and that kind of thing. We already know that that's a very, very big, a big group. Okay, so definitely we can see how it forms 95% of all the species on Earth. It's an incredibly varied group as well, ranging from very simple bodies to very complex bodies. So, for example, think of things like your sponges, very, very simple bodies. Compare that with your octopus, which is, of course, one of the very complex, complicated animals. Now, invertebrates are also biologically and ecologically important. Okay, so think of things like your giant clams and your sea cucumbers. They have very important biological roles, ecological roles, to filter seawater, filter the sediments, and keep the environment nice and clean. Invertebrates are often also commercially important, so think of your lobster, shrimp, shellfish, and squid, fishery industries, that kind of thing, of course, very, very important as well. Now, invertebrates, or inverts, as we like to shorten it to, are a huge group of animals with great diversity covering many different types of body size, shape, form, and function. They're not always super obvious on the reef because they often hide away or camouflage themselves. So you actually need to really train your eyes to spot many of the invertebrates on the reef, and it's also good to, know where to look to find them. Looking at some of the feeding methods, invertebrates, because it is such a big varied group, there's a lot of different methods that invertebrates use to feed themselves. So the first one we're going to look at is filter or suspension feeders. So these are things like your feather duster worms, like in this example of the video here. Also thinking of things like your giant clams and sponges. All right, so your filter or suspension feeders feed on floating organic matter in the water column. So they rely on the movement of water to bring the food to the animal. So they often have body parts that help them either capture food from the water column, like we can see here, or they've got these really lovely feathery-like tentacles that are, put out into the water, and then, they catch all the little bits of food and bring it into the mouth. Sponges, they suck in water and plankton through tiny pores. The plankton then gets trapped on special cells on the inside of the sponges, and water exits through the top of the sponge. And we'll go into that in a little bit more detail later in the lecture. Giant clams as well. They also pull water in through one siphon. Food gets trapped in feeding structures within the clam, and then the filtered water is then pushed out through the other siphon. Another method is grazing. So these are things like your sea cucumbers, all right? These will be our lawnmowers of the reef. They've got specialized mouth parts to allow them to scrape algae off the substrate. So this video here is showing the teeth of the sea urchin, and I'll explain in a little bit more detail later on in the lecture, but just really keep this video in mind. So you're seeing those 5 arrow-shaped teeth, working in unison to grab and tear at algae. Another one is what we call deposit feeders. So these are things like your sea cucumbers, and they feed on organic matter or detritus, which is, the remains of decomposing plants and animals that fall to the sea floor. So they sift through these sediments for food particles, they scoop clumps of sand into their mouth, consume the edible bits, and then excrete clean sand. Our next one are our scavengers. So these are things like your cleaner shrimp and many crabs. So these guys feed on the dead corpses of other animals. Maybe they feed on parasites or dead skin as well. So thinking of our cleaner shrimp examples, we know they perform that kind of function. And then of course you get your crabs that like to kind of eat whatever they can find. And last but not least, we definitely have some carnivorous predators in our invertebrates group as well. So thinking of your things like your crown of thorns starfish, your mantis shrimps, and of course the Portuguese man-of-war. So because they are predators, they actively hunt and consume other living animals. So the crown of thorns, for example, they feed on live coral. They digest the coral tissue outside of their body and then suck up that soupy digested mixture. The mantis shrimp, which we can see over here, they smash apart shellfish with oversized teardrop-shaped forelimbs that can snap out with more acceleration than a .22 caliber bullet. One punch can deliver over 1,500 newtons of force. It's enough to shatter aquarium glass and even dismember the mantis shrimp's prey. It's so fast, in fact, that their clubs leave cavitation bubbles, which are pockets of air created by fast-moving liquids in their wake. Those bubbles implode with enough force to stun the prey, even if the mantis shrimp happens to miss. The clubs that the mantis shrimp use to bludgeon their prey to death are composed of 3 distinct layers, optimized to minimize and distribute the amounts of force that each blow delivers back to the shrimp's club. So it's made with these layers of material. It's very, very interesting. It's a bit complicated, so I'm not going to talk about it too much here. But basically, the clubs themselves are strong enough to break those really hard materials like shells and that kind of thing. But they are also strong enough and I guess flexible enough as well that the club itself does not shatter. So very, very interesting. There's a lot of, I guess, mechanics and that kind of thing that have gone into the evolution of those clubs, which is really, really cool. All right, so we've learned a little bit about all the different invertebrates' feeding mechanisms. Now we're actually going to go into the identification of them. So again, we're just going to stick to kind of overarching family groups, okay? Like I said, it's quite a big group, so I don't want to, drag it out too much by going very much into detail of each individual species, because really we will be here forever. And we've still got a lifetime to learn, so maybe that'll happen down the track. So first off, we've got our sponges. So sponges are definitely the simplest organism that we have. They don't have any traditional body parts or organs or anything like that. It's just really a collection of cells. So sponges are found in all the world's oceans, and they come in many shapes and sizes. They are all sessile benthic organisms. So that means that they are stationary, they don't move, so once they settle, they stay there. And then of course they are benthic, which means they do spend all their time on, like, attached to the bottom. They are found at nearly all depths and habitats due to their amazing diversity. The basic body shape of a sponge is shaped by its nature as a filter feeder. Sponges pump water through channels and canals within their body, filtering out organic material as they do so. The pumping of water is driven by many small cells called flagella within the animal, and not by a central pumping organ. So this, like I said, the sponge does not have any specialized organs. It's really just a collection of specialized cells. So if we have a look in this example here, you can see the filtering action happening here. Okay, so they pull in, water from the sides, from all these little pores in the sides, and then this big opening at the top is where that clean water is going to come out. Sponges possess a large excurrent opening called an ossicule. Okay, so this one over here, this big one here, is the ossicule. And then all along the sides here, you'll have tiny pores covering the surface called ostia. So water is drawn in through the ostia by the beating of the cilia, so little kind of like hair-like cells. And this is for feeding and respiration. They are very efficient filter feeders. They use a matrix of canals to filter food out of the water, with their main source of nutrition being bacteria. This process of feeding is carried out at an astounding rate. A typical sponge pumps 4 to 5 times its own volume every minute. For a medium-sized individual, this equates to thousands of liters a day. As a result, they have earned the reputation as vacuums of the sea. Now, identifying sponges to species level is extremely difficult and often requires dissection of samples under high-powered microscopes. For that reason, sponge identification is mostly done on shape and functional group. The walls of sponges are structured with tiny crystal spicules of silica or calcium carbonate. It is these spicules, that are used for identification down to species level. Sponges are also often seen in symbiotic relationships with other organisms. So having a look at this picture over here. Ooh, my mouse is gone. There you go. You can see my pointer now. So you can have a look. There's a lot of other little organisms here hanging onto the sponge. So they often have symbiotic cyanobacteria that live in their tissues. Other filter feeding organisms such as feather stars and little sea cucumbers can be found in very close proximity to sponges as well, due to their ability to actively create currents and therefore bring in the plankton that they need to feed on. So here's a little video that I have for you guys, which should be playing now. So it kind of just shows that pumping ability. So we can see the diver is squirting a non-toxic dye at the bottom of these tube sponges, and you'll see within seconds, that water current is then, pumping through the sponge, and you can see how quickly that actually happens. So like I mentioned earlier, this does mean that sponges have a very important role on our reefs to actually keep the water and the environment around the corals and that kind of thing nice and clean. So I'll just play it again just in case you missed it. Again, looking at how quickly that is moving. So this is an excerpt of a longer video, all right, and I will link to the whole video for you guys to watch on the materials section in the online classroom platform. Now, jellyfish. So jellyfish bodies is made up of 98% water, actually, so they are majority water. They have a ring of muscle around the dome, so this is what we call the dome, this section here. So the muscles are just on the inside here, just around the mouth, and those ring of muscles is how the dome can actually pulsate, and it's that pulsing motion that causes the jellyfish to move, and so they can actively contract and relax those muscles, and that allows the jellyfish to hunt. So they are, of course, related to corals and anemones. So they do have those nematocysts, or those stinging cells on the tentacles, and they use those tentacles and those stinging cells to catch fish, crustaceans, and all the other various things that they eat. Next, we have our anemones. So anemones, it's got a very basic, simple body plan, consisting of a hollow tube with muscular walls. The crown of tentacles is the most obvious feature, which surrounds the mouth and functions in obtaining food. So in this one here, pretty much all you can see are the tentacles here. All right, we've got a tube anemone over here where you can see the tentacles quite easily. And then, of course, we've got our magnificent anemone over here. Again, also you can see the tentacles quite easily here. The tentacles, because they are, related to corals and jellyfish, they are covered in stinging cells, which are used to capture prey and repel predators. Now, often anemones are, they may have anemone fish and shrimps and that kind of thing living in them, but not all the time. Okay, so they can survive without them as well. They just tend to do a bit better with the anemones. So having a look at some of our examples here, all right, this is really just showing you that there's a lot of different, there's a big variety in form of the anemone. So, we definitely get quite a lot of these ones. These beaded anemones are quite common as well in Sodwana. I saw someone posted on the Facebook group this morning asking about this one, so I think the name was Martin Ruddy. Here's your mystery creature. All right, next we have our hydrozoans. These are also known as hydroids. Okay, so again, small predatory animals in the Cnidarian phylum. So again, related to your jellyfish, your anemones, corals, that kind of thing. So definitely they do have those stinging cells. Some are solitary and some are colonial. So focusing on our Portuguese man-of-war, or as we like to call them, blue bottles, all right, this is actually a colony of individual organisms, which is always something that is a bit new to people. So I'll just explain that a little bit more. So it is a colony of organisms, and each organism has its own function. So we've got one organism that forms the sail. Then we've got one organism that will form the kind of reproductive tentacles. You've got one set of organisms that will form the feeding tentacles, and then you'll get another set of organisms that form the stinging tentacles. And these organisms can only exist, they can only survive when they are in a colony to form the whole individual that you see here. So it's a bit of an abstract concept, I guess, but I hope that makes a little bit of sense. So looking at other types of hydroids that we might see on the reef, okay, fire coral is technically not a coral, okay, it is actually a hydroid or hydrozoan. We've also got these little fern-like looking hydroids that we sometimes get, and then these really beautiful, like flower-like hydroids as well. So definitely hydroids do have those stinging cells. Often on safety stops, you might feel, microscopic little stinging things, touching your face, your hands, that kind of thing while you're on your safety stops. It's most likely hydroids. So you do get, free-floating hydroids as well as the ones that like to be, attached to the reef. So it's most likely that. Again, in terms of the, I guess, danger aspect of them, the stings are usually not that strong. to cause any like real damage. It'll just be a little bit uncomfortable. Next we have our comb jellies. So these are planktonic jelly-like animals. They are often mistaken for jellyfish, but they are not true jellyfish. They do not have those stinging cells, okay? They have sticky cells, so they've got like a glue-like structure on their tentacles. So they catch their food by, putting out these tentacles and sticking to their prey as opposed to stinging it, all right? They've got this row of cilia, which you can see here. So they've got these rows of little hairs that beat. And as the little hairs beat, it catches the light, and that's why it kind of looks like they're having their own little disco in the water. So I've got a video over here that should be playing now for you. And this just kind of shows the ctenophores, or the comb jellies, in action. So you can see those little hairs beating there as it helps them move around. Okay, you can see it catching the light, and then of course these are the tentacles. Okay, so you can see the tentacles, going out to stick on the little prey. So here's a little, planktonic shrimp, and then the tentacles bring the food into its mouth. So you can often find them hiding in the upper layer of the water. Okay, so this is where their prey is. So if you do want to look for comb jellies, do look out in that upper layer of water. So again, on your safety stops. Next up, we have sea squirts, or these are also known as ascidians or tunicates. These strange creatures look very simple, but they actually have quite a complex body plan and development. They form a link between the invertebrates and the vertebrates. So the invertebrates, all the animals we're talking about now that don't have a backbone, and the vertebrates is the group that we humans belong to. So these creatures are found either solitary or in colonies. The solitary species are often a spherical or conical shape. So for example, these guys, they're a bit rounded, but yeah, they have kind of grouped together here in this example. So they've got two openings, all right? So you'll see in these examples, each one has two openings. Okay, so one of those openings is the in-current siphon. So this is the one that, sucks the water in, and then the other one will be an ex-current siphon, and so that'll be the one where the water goes out of. So colonial species form encrusting mats with the siphons giving the surface a perforated appearance. Next we have flatworms. So flatworms are different to nudibranchs. Okay, so often divers get flatworms and nudibranchs confused, all right, and we'll go through some of those identification keys now. But yeah, just keep that in mind. Flatworms are actually a different family. So they are in the platyhelminth family, where nudibranchs are a mollusk. So they are kind of like a snail. So talking about our flatworms here, they are flat, leaf-like or ribbon-like bodied animals. They don't have any external appendages, so they don't have any, bits sticking off them. It's just a nice flat, ribbon-like animal. So they are brightly colored, often very beautiful, very diverse in their coloration. They are bottom dwelling, so they like to stay nice and flat on the ground. They don't have very good eyesight. They've got what we call rudimentary eyes, so they're very, very basic eyes, basically just detecting light and shadow. But they have a very good chemosensing ability, so they smell things in the water very well. Now, some have actually adapted to mimic the appearance of nudibranchs. And that is because nudibranchs are known to their predators as being foul-tasting or poisonous. So the flatworms mimic their warning colors and hope that that will be enough to deter any potential predators. So looking at some of our examples here, again, we can see, they're quite flat, they're quite ribbon-like. They are very beautiful when they do swim. I don't know if any of you have seen them free swimming. It's always quite fun to watch them. They undulate their bodies as they swim around. But yeah, we can see, there's no external appendages. They might, you can see the front end here has these bits that stick out here, but yeah, definitely no, gills or feathery tentacles or anything like that on your flatworms. Next, we have our tube worms. So tube worms, the bodies are made up of identical segments with a unique head and tail segments. They live in coral heads or burrow into rocks, sand, or muddy areas. They are filter feeders, so they do like to live in places where there's, really good suspension of water. Okay, so there's lots of maybe ocean currents and that kind of thing that bring new water that is rich in food close to them. So our Christmas tree worms are these guys up at the top here. So the Christmas tree worms build a little tube inside of the coral to protect their soft bodies. So you can actually see one of the tubes here. You can see the open tube here. All right. So those are the little tubes that they like to build for themselves, and that protects their bodies. So to do that, they actually nestle their bodies against the living tissue of the coral, and that forces the coral polyps to grow around the worm's body. Christmas tree worms are filter feeders. Their food consists of zooplankton, phytoplankton, and detritus particles. So remember our zooplankton and our phytoplankton, that would be your animal and your plant plankton. So they extend their the gills, or what are called radioles. So they extend these bits of their body out of the hole. Okay, the prey is trapped in these little tentacles, and then it moves down to the head. So just a quick note, with our Christmas tree worms, 2, little Christmas trees is one worm. Okay, so each worm actually has 2 of these little branches that they stick out. So here is one worm, here is one worm, here is one worm. Okay. Compare that with our feather duster worms here. So in this case, one of these is one worm. Okay, so the feather duster worms, the tubes are made from a tough parchment-like material that the worm creates for itself, and it may be strengthened by bits of shell and sand. Feathery arms or tentacles are also called radioles. All of these guys here are the radioles. They are extended into the water column, and they are used for both a feeding and a respiratory function. So both to catch food and to breathe. Next, we have shrimps, crabs, and lobsters. Okay, so this is quite a big group, all right? When it gets down to identifying in between, is it a crab, is it a shrimp, is it a lobster, that kind of thing, you need to get a little bit more technical and actually count like body segments and that kind of thing. So I'm actually not going to go through that today. Again, it's an incredibly varied group, so I'm just going to give you an idea of the body plans, okay, to look at. And then again, I will post some articles and that kind of thing that you guys can read after the lecture. So they are in the group Arthropoda, which means jointed foot, and they are actually one of the largest groups of animals on the planet. Like I said, incredibly varied. They've got a wide array of adaptations. They do have an exoskeleton. Okay, so the exoskeleton will be, that shell or carapace, whatever you want to call it, and that, protects all the soft internal organs. And when as the animal grows, it actually has to molt that shell and, create a new exoskeleton. So these are often quite cryptic, they're quite shy animals, so you often find them hiding away either in coral, in anemones, maybe burrowed into the sand, or even in little caves and crevices. So now you'll notice here that I have included the, oh, I'm struggling to find my, there we go, I couldn't find my pointer. I have included hermit crabs over here. Okay, now I'll just give you a bit of a heads up, I guess. The hermit crabs are actually not considered true crabs. All right, so again, it's got to do with the number of body parts and that kind of thing that they've got. But I did want to include them because we do get them in Sodwana. I do love finding hermit crabs. They're quite cute. So yeah, definitely we do get them. Next up, we have our cowrie snails. Okay, these are also quite common, although they are relatively shy. So they're a bit inconspicuous, I guess. You don't see them too often, but I think it's mostly because not a lot of people take notice of these guys. But they are a snail. They've got these really glossy, smooth, egg-shaped shells, which have a tooth-like structure on the underside. So they've got quite a small aperture, and that's because, so most snails that you look at, if you pick it up, they've got what we call an operculum, which acts a bit like a trapdoor to close up that shell and keep the soft body on the inside nice and safe if there's any predators or anything like that. Cowrie snails do not have that operculum, so they don't have that little trapdoor. Instead, they have a really small opening, essentially. So their opening is very, very small, and it's actually got like little tooth-like grooves that makes it difficult for predators to reach them on the inside of their shells. So you can see in our examples here, this over here is the shell. We can see the shell here, and then we can see the actual snail's body kind of trying to cover up the shell. All right, we can see it on this example here. And then over here, this white section here, that is the shell, and the rest of this is actually the tissue of the snail. And the tissue of the snail is called the mantle. So the mantle is what secretes the protein and calcium carbonate to build, repair, and enlarge the shell. As the need for a bigger shell arises, the snail dissolves part of the shell and rebuilds it a little bit bigger to allow constant growth. So if we think of things like our hermit crabs, they go into shells, that fit their body, and then as they grow too big for that shell, they actually need to leave that shell to find a new, bigger shell. All right, the cowrie snails do not do that. So the cowrie snails just keep rebuilding their shell. So they'll dissolve a little bit, build it a little bit bigger, and then grow into that space. Okay, again, as they continue to grow, they will dissolve a little bit more and then, continue that cycle. Giant clams are another one of our, mollusk organisms, okay? So they are made up of these two shell segments that can be brought together for protection from predators or exposure. What I mean by exposure is if you have giant clams, say, in a tidal area, okay, they can survive in that tidal area. So when the tide goes down, maybe the clam is, it's settled in a place where at maybe a very, very low tide, it's out in the open. Okay, so what it does is it closes up its shell nice and tight to keep that fleshy tissue nice and hydrated and soft and that kind of thing. So it's not going to dry out if the tide goes down too low. Now, the giant clams also have the same kind of symbiotic algae as corals. So they also have zooxanthellae that lives inside their tissues. So also they get quite a lot of their energy from that algae in a similar way to corals. But they also are filter feeders, and they're very important filter feeders on our reefs. Like I mentioned earlier, they do have quite important role in keeping the water clean of, bacteria and nutrients and that kind of thing to keep the corals nice and healthy. They are endangered in many parts of the world, so this is due to the intensive exploitation by fishing vessels. This is mainly, it's mainly the larger adults that are killed and targeted because they are the most profitable. They are sold for their meat because, in some places of the world it's quite a delicacy to eat giant clam meat. There are some people that use the what we call the adductor muscles. So the adductor muscle is the muscle that actually connects the two parts of the shell together. They use that in traditional medicines and that kind of thing. And then, of course, the shells themselves are very beautiful, and so the shells can be sold as decorative ornaments as well. Now, giant clams really do live up to their name as being giant, okay? They can weigh up to 200 kilos, depending on the species, and can live for over 100 years. Now, there's a bit of a misconception with giant clams that the clam can, close up or snap shut and trap people and, that kind of thing. But the adductor muscles, so again, those muscles that connect the two parts of the shell and control that opening and closing of the shell, they actually move quite slowly. So they don't actually move fast enough to surprise a diver or anybody who's, for whatever reason gone and put a body part into, the clam. So yes, definitely it's not going to take you by surprise, but like we said, we don't want to be interacting with anything in a negative way. So we want to keep our hands to ourselves, keep our body parts to ourselves, and just passively observe the aquatic environment. Okay, moving on to my absolute favorite marine invertebrate is our nudibranchs. Okay, so nudibranchs are they've got an extraordinary range of colors and body shapes, incredibly varied animals. The colors are incredibly diverse and often very beautiful. The nudibranchs have a set of gills, which are called serrata, and they've also got a set of tentacles, which are called rhinophores for chemosensing. So having a look at what those things are. So if we look at this example up here, we've got the gills over here and the little rhinophores or tentacles on the head over here. Now, nudibranch literally translates to naked gills. Okay, so these exposed gills over here is the thing that we are referring to. So these exposed gills over here, those are the things that we are referring to when we talk about the naked gills. Now, some nudibranchs have actually adapted to breathe through the skin via diffusion, so they don't actually need those feathery gills extended into the water column. They actually just kind of breathe right through their skin, which is pretty cool. So almost all nudibranchs are carnivores, and they feed on a variety of things like sponges, hydroids, tunicates, anemones, or even other nudibranchs. So we get some, cannibalistic nudibranchs. There is one species that feeds on the Portuguese man-of-war, okay, and that species is this guy over here, Glaucus atlanticus. Okay, so this one does feed on the Portuguese man-of-war, and instead of digesting the stinging cells that the Portuguese man-of-war has, they actually take those stinging cells and deposit them along the surface of its skin to then use as a defense against its own predators. Some species that feed on anemones can do similar things. So they also may take the stinging cells, they won't digest them, they'll actually transfer them onto their skin. We've got another group of nudibranchs called sap-sucking slugs. Now, these are a bit of a distant relative of the nudibranchs, but they feed on the internal cell structures of plants. So they harvest chloroplasts from these plants. Now, if you think back to, biology at school, your chloroplast is the cell in the plant that is responsible for photosynthesis. Okay, so when they harvest these chloroplasts, they actually retain them in what is called a live state. So the chloroplasts continue to photosynthesize, and so it feeds the sap-sucking slugs their major share of energy. And so often we nickname these sap-sucking slugs as solar-powered slugs. So like I mentioned earlier, Glaucus atlantica, all right, here's one of our special nudibranchs. This nudibranch spends its life floating at the surface of the open ocean, and it feeds on organisms like the Portuguese man-of-war and other venomous siphonophores. Now, we haven't really looked at siphonophores, but they are pelagic, jelly-like animals that live in colonies that form these really long chains, and you might have seen those on safety stops and that kind of thing. So like I was saying, Glaucus atlanticus stores those stinging cells from its prey within its own tissues as a defense against predators. One of my favorite nudibranchs is, of course, the Bornella anguilla, which is this one over here, also known as the snaky Bornella. This is another special nudibranch. It is one of the only nudibranchs that can swim quite well, using an eel-like undulation of its body. And I think I did see footage of one of our snaky Bornellas having a swim in that little video that we played in the very beginning. So definitely one of my favorite ones to see. I always get extremely excited when I see the Bornellas. They are definitely my favorites. Alright, so most nudibranchs are hermaphrodites, which means simultaneous fertilization is possible. You may see their spawn ribbons, which I've got on the screen now, that are laid on hard substrates of reef. So the eggs are often coated in a toxic substance that actually prevents any predators from trying to eat them. So I've got a few examples at the bottom over here of some nudibranchs mating. So sometimes they do this kind of body positioning, sometimes they just kind of piggyback on each other. And then of course this one here is actually laying its eggs. So you can see those eggs coming out in that nice little rose or ribbon shape there. Again, having a look at the diversity of nudibranchs, okay, this is not even scratching the surface, okay, of the different nudibranchs that you can find in Sodwana. I don't even want to try and make a guess as to how many species of nudibranchs we have there, because they're just so varied. They range in size as well, so you get ones that are about 1 millimeter long to at least a couple centimeters long. So definitely huge variety. Now you'll notice that this one over here, okay, we can't see any of those external gills. So for example, in this one over here or this one over here, we can't see that here. There are some groups of nudibranchs where they actually hide their gills. So they kind of hide their gills just underneath, like on the sides here. So it'll be hidden just underneath here. Or like I said, they can breathe through their skin as well. So definitely very cool. So again, comparing these ones with our flatworms, we can see that there is a lot of external appendages, and definitely these ones are not sitting, flat or ribbon-like against the substrate. They definitely are more of a, slug-like shape. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Next, we have the octopus, which is always a favorite among many people to see. Octopus are benthic and usually quite hard to find, as they live in caves and under rocks and mostly come out at nighttime. An octopus has no internal bone structure, and as a result it can fit its entire body through very small gaps, which I'm demonstrating in this little video over here. Now, octopus have very good eyesight, okay? Their eyes are considered the most sophisticated of all invertebrates, although they evolved entirely separately to mammalian eyes. This is a case of what is called convergent evolution, where the same feature evolves completely independently in different organisms. The eyes of the largest squid are the largest known eyes in the animal kingdom. Now, I'm sure you will have kind of had a chance to see this for yourself, but octopus have the incredible ability to change the color and the texture of their skin to help them, really camouflage and blend into their surroundings. And so they do that with these little cells here. Okay, so these are called chromatophores. So chromatophores are actually little organs that are present in the skin of many cephalopods. Okay, so cephalopods are your squid, your octopus, and your cuttlefish. And these chromatophores contain pigment sacs that become more visible as small muscles pull the sac open, making the pigment expand under the skin. Chromatophore pigments are typically only red, yellow, or brown. Other colors are attained by using a second layer of structures in the skin called iridophores. And these are stacks of very thin cells that are capable of reflecting light back at different wavelengths and possibly even different polarities. Interestingly, the iridophore reflects the color that the iridophore reflects is actually dependent on the angle from which it is observed. So octopus are crazy. They also change the texture of their skin through what is known as papillae. So papillae are these little projections of the skin which can be deformed and reformed using hydrostatic mechanisms. Okay, so that's how they have that ability. So they've got chromatophores, iridophores, and papillae to help them, really blend in quite well to their surroundings. Octopus crawl over the benthos using their legs for movement. However, when they wish to move fast, usually to avoid predators, they will use jet propulsion by compressing water out of their bodies. So remember, if you've seen an octopus, they've got this little siphon over here. So if they want to move away quickly, they'll squeeze all of the water out of their siphon and then off they kind of go. Now, swimming in this way kind of means that the octopus appears to be swimming backwards, with its head is going first and then the legs are kind of trailing behind. This is quite an inefficient method of propulsion, so it's actually only used if it's really needed. Octopus are nearly exclusively solitary, and they only come together when they need to breed. So sea stars next. Alright, so sea stars, feather stars, urchins, and sea cucumbers are all part of the phylum called Echinodermata. Echinodermata literally translates to spiny skin. Their calcareous skeletons are composed of plates or ossicles made from calcite, which can be fused to form, for example, the shell of a sea urchin, or they may articulate out to form the various arms of a sea star. These calcite ossicles can extend as external projections in the form of spines or warts. They've also got a water vascular system which helps them with the locomotion by pushing fluid into tube feet, which we can see over here. So these little orange sucker-like structures here, those are the tube feet. So in sea stars, the mouth is against the substrate and the anus is on top of its head. So the anus will be somewhere in this area here, and then this is the underside of a sea star, and this is the mouth right in the middle. There's a smaller opening as well, just off center, like on the top of the sea star, and that is what is called the madreporite. Now, the madreporite is basically this little opening that acts like a water filter for that water vascular system. So it prevents any sediments or anything like that from entering the body of the sea star. Sea stars feed by first extending its stomach out of its mouth, which we can see in this example here. So this kind of gooey jelly-like structure here, that is actually the stomach. So they protrude their stomach from their mouth, and they put it, they kind of lay it over any digestible parts of what they want to eat. So things like mussels and clams. The prey tissue is partially digested externally before that soupy food is then sucked up inside to finish digestion in the little digestive glands that run inside each arm. Beyond their distinctive shape, sea stars are famous for their ability to regenerate limbs, and in some cases entire bodies. They accomplish this by housing most or all of their vital organs inside their arms. So we can see here. So this is an arm of an adult sea star that has, that was detached. Okay, and then we can see that, that new little sea star is growing off that arm. Sea stars have light-sensing eyes on each tip, on the tip of each arm. The modified tube feet near the end of each arm, which we can see here, these like really long ones here with the little orange bit at the end, those are actually for chemosensing, so again, to smell. Now, sea stars also have papillae, which, remember, are those little hydrostatic controlled little projections on the surface of their skin, and sea stars actually use that to facilitate gas exchange. So again, that's how they breathe. And so that's what actually makes the sea star look a bit fuzzy. So if you ever look at a sea star and it looks a bit fuzzy, it's just got its breathing organs, really going at it. Okay. So our example down at the bottom here is, of course, our crown of thorns sea star. So the crown of thorns has an important and active role in maintaining coral reef biodiversity by driving ecological succession. When populations are under control, they prevent fast-growing corals from overpowering slow-growing corals. However, in large numbers, this sea star can cause dramatic coral decline. So having a look at some of our different types of sea stars, again, they're quite varied, lots of different colors, shapes. I love this one. This one is literally called a fat-armed sea star. I always laugh because, it's, relatively unoriginal in its naming. I just think that's so funny. And then, of course, we have our crown of thorns example over here. So the crown of thorns sea star can have up to 36 arms, and so of course with an eye on each end of its arm, it can have up to 36 eyes. And then we've got our cushion sea star over here. This is the one that tends to look quite fuzzy when you look at it. Their papillae with their that breathing organ that sits over the top of them, that's quite obvious in this species in particular. Next, we have our feather stars. So feather stars have long, feathery arms that they often hold up into the water column to aid for, to help them filter feed. So while doing this, they are attached to the reef at their center, and you can probably see that best in this example here. So you can see the little, this little attachment structure that they've got here. And then they've got the arms that sit out into the water column. They are quite delicate in appearance, and their arms often move with the currents of the water. So they kind of wave around in the currents. They feed on plankton with their feathery arms. In this video here, you can see that they can swim, which is always fun to see. So most often you'll see them on the reef either looking like this, with the arms out, or they might be curled up like this. Okay, but then in some instances they can swim if they need to. And then they are often home to a lot of other little organisms, like is being showed in this video, little fish, little shrimps that tend to be quite intimately linked with these these organisms. Yeah, so the little organisms that live in these feather stars are often quite well adapted to live in these environments, so they often they'll have very similar coloration and that kind of thing to the feather star that they choose to live in. Yeah, they're quite interesting. I have seen the feather stars swimming myself. They're quite interesting to watch swim. I'm sure you saw in the beginning of that video, like the arms just kind of going in all directions. It's quite interesting. Yeah, and again, there it's swimming again, which is great. I will post this video as well, so we'll move on, but I will post it so you can go and watch it again. Alright, next we have our sea urchins. So sea urchins, they're characterized by quite a small to medium-sized round body with lots of movable spines. The spines can inflict quite painful wounds, and some species actually do have a venom in the spine, so again it might cause like a stinging sensation or that kind of thing. You've probably seen the shells. Okay, so I included a picture of the shells just to let you know. You've probably seen these washed up on the beach and that kind of thing, so if you didn't know what they came from, this is it. They are sea urchin shells, I guess. So the mouth is made up of 5 strong calcium carbonate arrow-shaped teeth or plates that point towards the center of the mouth, and it's got a fleshy tongue-like structure within. So you'll remember that video kind of towards the beginning of the lecture. So this mouth structure, or the entire chewing organ, is actually known as Aristotle's lantern. So specialized muscles control the protrusion of the jaw structures and the actioning of the teeth, and so with all of this, the animal can then grasp, scrape, pull, and tear at algae. So again, in this picture here, it's a bit of a cross section, so you can see the structuring of the mouth and the teeth there. Lastly, we have our sea cucumbers. So these are cylindrical, elongated animals. They've got quite soft bodies with kind of almost a leathery type of skin. Their internal skeleton, they don't really have much of a skeleton, but they've got these plates of calcium carbonate that are embedded beneath the skin, and that kind of gives them a little bit of structure. But if you've ever felt one of these, they're quite squishy. So sea cucumbers breathe through their anus. They extract oxygen from the water in a pair of respiratory trees that branch off the cloaca just inside the anus. So they breathe by drawing water in through the anus and then expelling it. Sea cucumbers ingest large volumes of sediment, and as it passes through them, they extract the organic material and so are vitally important for reef health as they remove decaying matter from the environment. This helps recycle nutrients, it breaks down detritus and other organic matter, after which the bacteria that is naturally involved in these kind of processes, they can then get in and continue that degradation process. Sea cucumbers are often ignored by most of the marine predators because of their toxins that they contain, and because of their often spectacular defensive systems. However, they remain a prey for some highly specialized predators which are not affected by their toxins, or opportunistic predators who cannot find anything better to eat. Some species of coral reef sea cucumbers can defend themselves by expelling their sticky Cuvierian tubules, which we can see in this example over here. So these white threads here, these are those Cuvierian tubules. And basically all these things is just enlargements of the respiratory tree that floats freely inside the body cavity. And they actually expel these to entangle their predators. So when startled, these cucumbers may expel some of them through a tear in the wall of the cloaca in an automatic process known as evisceration. Replacement tubules can grow back in, between 1 to 5 weeks, but it depends on the species. The release of these tubules can also be accompanied by the discharge of a toxic chemical, which can kill animals in the vicinity and is one more method by which these animals can defend themselves. Now, going off this again, you hear stories of divers grabbing onto sea cucumbers and purposefully squeezing them to make them eviscerate. Again, I'm not sure why you would want to do that. I think it does cause a bit of stress to the animal. So again, if you do see someone doing this, please do ask them to stop. It's not good for the animal. And again, we want to be good ambassadors for the reef environment. Again, we don't want to negatively harm or interact with any of the animals. So again, just keep your hands to yourself, please. So this organism over here is called a sea apple. All right, at least that's what we call it in Sodwana. But it is basically a relative of the sea cucumber. They often bury themselves in sand, so this is quite a rare picture where you see, the body as well. They usually bury themselves that all you can see is the mouth and then these beautiful feathery tentacles. I've got a couple of videos as well of sea cucumbers that I'll be posting in the related materials, so do go and check them out. They're quite interesting. So moving on to our little quiz section of the lecture. So for our newcomers, we just like to kind of check our identification skills here based on the information that I've shared. So just while you're sitting at home, you can just kind of have a guess as to what these invertebrates are. So this one is, of course, a sponge, okay? This one over here, okay, it's quite brightly colored. We can see it's quite flat. Yeah, so like leaf-like or ribbon-like, and I'm not seeing any external projections. So of course this is a flatworm. Next up, we have a cylindrical body. There'll be an opening on this end and an opening on this end. So of course this is a sea cucumber. All right, this one, so we can see a pair of these, little Christmas tree shaped, organs, I guess. So of course this is a tube worm. More specifically, it is a Christmas tree worm, but in terms of the quiz that you're going to do, just calling it a tube worm is fine. All right, this one we can see, it's got quite a few appendages. So of course this is a shrimp, or crab or lobster. This one is our harlequin shrimp. All right, this one, quite a squishy looking body. We can see those lovely long tentacles that will have those stinging cells in them. So of course this is a jellyfish. All right, this one looks like a jellyfish, okay, and we can see those little flashing lights heading down the side. Remember, it's not actually producing its own light, it's merely reflecting light along those little hair-like structures. So this one does not have any stinging cells on it, so of course it is a comb jelly. Okay, this one we can see, it's a solitary organism. We know that they can form colonies as well. We can see it's kind of sitting on the bottom here, and it's got two openings, an in-current and an ex-current siphon. So of course this is an ascidian or tunicate or sea squirt. All of those names refer to the same organism. All right, this one, okay, 10 points if you find the fish hiding in this picture, but, we can see these lovely tentacles, they look quite leathery in appearance. So, of course, this is an anemone. All right, this one of our masters of camouflage, hey? Remember those amazing chromatophores, iridophores, and papillae that help these guys you know, blend into their surroundings quite well. So of course this is an octopus. Okay, we've got another thing with, you know, these really feathery tentacles. Okay, we can see a tube that it has constructed for itself. So of course this is a tube worm. All right, I know they look quite similar to our feather stars in terms of all these beautiful feathery tentacles, or, you know, arms that are put up into the water column. So again, look out for that tube. If it does have this tube structure, it is of course a tube worm. Okay, we have another one here. Again, most likely a crab, shrimp, or lobster. All right, this one I think is a crab. Again, can't really see the body segments too well to count them, but yeah, we can see that that's what it is. And it is living in close proximity to an anemone. That is all of these tentacles over here. All right, this one we can see it's, you know, fairly star-shaped. It's, you know, a bit of a dead giveaway as to what this guy is. So of course this is a sea star. All right, this little guy, we can see him hiding in the coral, probably hiding in Acropora or Poecilopora corals, so you know, your staghorn corals or your knob-horned corals. This of course is a little coral crab. Now, a fun fact about these guys, which I didn't mention earlier, is they actually protect their corals from those crown of thorns starfish. There seems to be a bit of a yeah, the idea is that these guys, if the crown of thorns sea star crawls onto the coral that these little crabs are living in, they'll actually use their little pinchers, so these guys over here, the little pinchers, to actually nip at the tube feet of the crown of thorns sea star, and it'll actually chase the sea star away, which is pretty cool. Next up, of course, we have, you know, the small body with the long spines poking off. So, of course, that is a sea urchin. This one we can see, you know, it's kind of an egg-shaped animal feeding on soft coral. That's another thing that I didn't mention earlier. These guys do like to feed on soft corals, sponges, various different organisms. But, of course, this is, of course, a cowrie snail. All right, this one, you know, looks a bit like a little sea slug. We can see a lot of, you know, these feathery projections over here, and we can see the little rhinophores here that are quite small, okay? So this is, of course, a nudibranch, okay, looking at those extended gills. Again, quite easy to identify this one. You know, he is part of our lobster, shrimp, crab grouping. Okay, so of course this is a lobster. Okay, next up, again, we have these kind of feathery arms extended into the water column. We can see they're quite curled in, and we can see this little structure where it's kind of hanging onto the reef. Remember, they can unfurl these to feed, and also they use them to swim if they need to as well. So of course this is a feather star. Next up, we have a very brightly colored organism here. Of course, it is made up of two parts of a shell, you know, that can come together to protect all of this fleshy you know, tissue in there. So of course this is a giant clam. Alrighty, and that is the end of our presentation. So I see we have gone a little bit over time. I do apologize for that. Like I said, you know, I did warn you, it is quite a large group of animals to get through. So yeah, I can hang around and answer a few questions now if anybody has any. I'm just going to go into the chat now. Charlene asked, I heard sea cucumbers keep sea urchins in check. Is that correct? I don't know. I can do a bit of research on that. I know sea urchins, you know, keep algae in check. Yeah, I'll do some research for you, and I will pop that answer on the Facebook group. I will be posting some related materials, you know, some more videos, articles, websites, that kind of thing, in the related materials section on the Google Classroom. So do go and have a look at those a bit later today as well. And don't forget to do the quizzes. Okay, so remember to get that certificate of completion at the end of this course. Please do remember to do all the quizzes. And yeah, thank you so much for posting again on the Facebook group. I love seeing all your pictures and comments and questions and that kind of thing. Yeah, we'll definitely keep using that platform as well. And yeah, just a reminder to subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. We are going to be posting more stuff here as well, so definitely get excited for that. And yeah, I'll just hang around a little bit longer for any questions. Otherwise, if you guys do need to go, have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow. Unfortunately, tomorrow is going to be our last lecture. It's come so quickly. I'm quite sad about that, but yeah, it's going to be a good one. Oysters and mussels part of the giant clam family. So they will be related, okay? They are bivalves. So bivalve meaning, two shells or two parts to the shell. So they will be in the same family or related, but I don't think they're the same family. So it gets when we're naming things in the science world, it gets a bit technical in terms of what's family, genus, related, things like that. Okay, so but yes, they will be related. Thanks, Sarita. Always fun to see videos like that as well. Yeah, you guys are so welcome. I'm so glad you're enjoying these lectures. Again, I'm really loving presenting them. I love getting to talk about this kind of stuff, so it's really great. Okay, so I'm not seeing any questions pop up here, so that's all right. We might end it there then today. I think we have gone a little bit over time, so I do understand you probably have other things to get done today as well. But yeah, definitely feel free to post any questions that you think of in the Facebook group, and hopefully I'll see you guys tomorrow. Have a lovely day.